Hello everyone and welcome to Alumni Weekend 2021. I am Mike Mitchell, Assistant Director of Alumni Relations here at Salem State University.
And I'm Sebastian DiFelice, the owner and pitmaster of the Don's Barbecue.
And today we're going to be talking about brisket preparation and all things you want to consider when preparing your barbecue feast for you and your friends. We're coming to you from Newton in the Don's Prep Workshop, where he's going to be preparing a nice big piece of brisket that he'll be taking out with him on the road this weekend. And we're looking forward to a great presentation today.
So I'm just getting my ingredients ready to go so that I'm not fumbling for them when I need them.
What are some of the ingredients?
So I keep it very simple. I use some yellow mustard for my, to slather the brisket with, some kosher salt, and then my rub. So briskets are the heart and soul of Texas barbecue. Texas, they say, if it ain't brisket, it ain't barbecue. Now, this is your average brisket. It's about 14 pounds. The brisket comes from the chest of the animal. There are lots of different things to consider when you're buying a brisket. Is it what the grade is? Is it a left or right? What kind of is it a Packers brisket? Or are you just going to buy the flat? And I'll get into the different names of the parts of the brisket in a minute. So this is what I typically use in all of my cooking. It's a Angus prime, and it's about, like I said, this one's about 15 pounds. One of the most important things about cooking a brisket is its preparation. Okay, and one of the steps of the preparation is the trimming of the fat. What you want to do is you want to leave enough fat so that you get some good rendered fat after it's fully cooked. You don't want any white gristle or anything like that left, because that's not very appetizing and it's not very tasty. So what I'm doing here is I'm trimming it down. I leave about 1/4 of an inch all around. You also want to make sure that when you're trimming, that you make the brisket fairly even, so it cooks uniform, so it cooks evenly on throughout on all sides. The trimming also dictates how much bark you have on your piece of meat. Bark is the final ingredient in the process of smoking, where you get the rub, where you get the fat that's rendered, where you get the smoke, and it creates a covering on the meat that we call the bark. So proper trimming is very important to a good, consistent bark on the end product. Okay, so we're going to go through. And I'm going to start getting into the nitty-gritty of the trimming now. So every brisket comes with this plate of fat. You can see it right here. You want to get rid of a substantial portion of that. This piece of fat is what connects the flat, which is this part, to the point, which is the fattier, the thicker side of the brisket. It's also called the decal. in some areas. So what you want to do with a very sharp knife, just want to start, you see all this fat that I'm taking out, right? Just want to make sure that you're removing as much of the fat as you can while leaving, the meat.
Let's talk a little bit about the history of the Don's barbecue.
Okay.
What made you want to get involved with this? How did you get started?
So, for the first 25 years of my professional career, I worked in corporate America. I worked for some of the big national banks. When I turned 56, I got too old and too expensive. So I got laid off, and I decided that I didn't want to get back into that business again. I had always been, smoking was always a passion of mine. So I decided to make a go of it, and I started catering. I had been doing it for friends, and for my own enjoyment for many years. But then I decided to give it a try to make a business out of it, and I've been pretty successful at it. And I've never looked back. So, I want to show this to you. You have this piece of fat here. You have this vein of fat that runs through here, along here, and it'll come up right back through here. Okay, so that's the fat that separates this part, the flat, like I said, from the decal, or the point, which is a much fattier piece of the brisket, as you can see. Now, sometimes we'll remove it. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll separate the point from the flat for ease of cooking. It cooks a lot faster if you separate it. Also for if I'm going to be making burnt ends, because you make the burnt ends, contrary to popular belief, you don't make the burnt ends from the point, or from the flat. You make it from the point, because it's a much fattier, much more sturdy piece of meat. Okay, so for this one, I'm going to remove the point from the flat, just to show you how it's done. And it's hardly scientific. All you're doing is following the fat. Right? Wherever the fat takes you, that's where you go. There you have it. That's your point, and there's your flat. And what you do is just keep on trimming away. Now, if you're going to leave your brisket whole, if you're not going to trim your Packers brisket, if you're not going to separate the point from the flat, it's going to take about 14-pounder at 250 to 275 degrees should take about 12 to 14 hours, depending on the depending on many factors, the weather, what kind of wood you're using, the thickness of the meat. So
is the old adage low and slow? Is there some truth to that?
There are several ways of doing it. You can do it low and slow. That's where you keep it at where you keep the temperature between 225 and 250, or you can do it hot and fast, which is about 250 to 275. And then you can reduce your time by about 2 or 3 hours that way. I tend to for my business I tend to cook these at a slightly higher temperature, around 275, and it's I found that it really doesn't affect the outcome very much. It's if as long as you adhere to the proper steps, you're not going to it shouldn't you shouldn't be able to tell, the average person shouldn't be able to tell the difference between a piece of meat that's been cooked at 250 or a piece of meat that's been cooked at 275. And brisket is a fairly substantial piece of meat, so it does take higher temperatures. I found a lot better. I wouldn't do that. I would never think of doing that with my ribs, for instance. My ribs, I would, I cook at 250 to 225. Same thing with my chicken. I would never cook my chicken at 275, because then you just come up with burnt chicken. Okay, so this is pretty well trimmed. All right, got 2 pieces here. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to apply the rub. There's some discussion, controversy as to how to best apply your rub, what a true rub should be. There's always heated discussion throughout the barbecue world. Purists will use just a straight 50-50 mix of kosher salt and coarse black pepper, which is very good in and of itself. It brings out it really brings out the flavor of the meat. I like to use when I make my rub, I like to use a combination of black pepper, some garlic powder, and some paprika, some other spices, but also pretty simple stuff, right? I don't get too complicated. A lot of people will put salt in their rub. I like to add the salt separately. It kind of makes for a dry brine. So first step is you want to just throw some salt on your meat. Give it a pat in. This also lets you control the amount of salt better than if you just have like 50-50. I think that can tend to get too salty if you put it directly in your rub. So now the next thing is, how do you keep the rub adhered to the meat without drastically changing the flavor? I've used many, many liquids to try and make that happen. I found that just plain old yellow mustard is the best. So just slather it on. You don't have to get both sides either, by the way. Just get the top and the sides are the most important, right? So just slather it on. Don't be too, don't be too stingy with it. The nice thing about the yellow mustard is once it is cooked, the flavors kind of blend very nicely and disappear into the rub that you're using, right? Now that that's done, the next step is applying the rub, okay? Again, this is coarse black pepper, onion powder, garlic powder, some paprika. That's it. Okay? And just give it a sprinkle. Now they call it a rub, but you're not really going to rub it in. I suppose some people do, but I just kind of, give it a little pat, try and get the sides. You don't need a lot of it, right? You don't want to. You want the flavor of the meat to come out. The whole idea of a rub is to accent the flavor of the meat, not to take its place. Now, there are a lot of places in this process where you can screw up, and that's fine. The whole idea of making good barbecue is to make bad barbecue first, right? You can't make good barbecue unless you make bad barbecue first. These are just, so these are all little tricks I've learned. So hopefully it will save you from making the same mistakes I did when I first started doing this about 15, 20 years ago. So there you have it. This is the point of the brisket. This is a flat. I'd like to talk now a little bit about the actual smoking of the brisket and how best to do that. So several factors, as I mentioned earlier, come into play when you're smoking your brisket. You have the weather. Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it humid? Is it raining? Is it, has there been a dry spell? What condition is your wood in? Is it fully aged? Is it kind of green? Is it wet? The size of your smoker. So there are just lots of things. So I found that. So I'm going to start with how to build your fire. When you're building your fire, what I found is, however you start it, whatever you do, don't start it with lighter fluid. Start it with paper, or if you can get a propane starter to start the wood, right, to start your kindling, that's the best way. That's how I do it. But if not, you can get these fire starters. You can get fat wood to help start the fire. Just don't use any liquid accelerants, because then you just get that taste and smell throughout the cook process. So I like to start off with a good substantial fire just to get the heat of my smoker up to temp. So I might throw in 6 or 7 logs, and then just start it and let it burn for about half hour, 45 minutes, to let the let the smoker come up to 275, 250, 275. Once you've done that once your fire is going and you've got a good stable temperature, what you want to do is you want to then check the fire every half hour or so, make sure that it's that it's going well. Maybe throw 1 or 2 logs on at most, every half hour to 45 minutes. More than that, the temperature is going to fluctuate too much, and that affects how your meat cooks, right? So again, use aged wood. Big fire to begin with. Bring your smoker up to temp, and then just check it every half hour, 45 minutes to make sure that it's going well, it's burning well, and that it's not getting too hot or too cold. You also don't want a ton of white or black smoke, okay, because that indicates that the fire is burning too hot and that you have too much fuel on the fire. So you want you want almost like a wisp of bluish white smoke coming out of your smokestack. Also, when you're cooking, once you place your brisket or any meat, that's it. Open your smoker as fewer times as possible. I open my smoker 3 times. When I'm placing the meat, about halfway through the cooking process to check the meat, and then at the end when I'm ready to take it off. Now let me talk a little bit about wrapping or not wrapping the brisket. There's no right or wrong way, and I encourage you to use all 3 of the methods that I'm going to talk about now, just to see how they affect your cooking of your brisket. So the first method is to wrap the brisket in tin foil, what we call the Texas crutch. Okay, this will help keep the juices in. It will also steam the brisket, making it more tender. The second method is to wrap it in butcher paper. This is my preferred method. It's just a piece of butcher paper that the brisket is wrapped in, and then kept in until you're ready to serve. The last method is naked, without any wrap whatsoever. When to wrap? When do you wrap your brisket? If any of you have ever done any barbecuing whatsoever, you've undoubtedly heard of the stall, right? The stall is a chemical process in the meat that happens when it hits a certain temperature, usually around 165 to 175. The meat seems to stop cooking. That's not necessarily the case. What's happening is the steam is being released, moisture is being released from the meat, therefore the temperature is not going up as quickly as you might want it to be. This is the point at which I wrap my briskets. Okay, so and it happens probably about halfway through the cook process, right? So if these briskets were to take 9 hours, at about 4 hours I would check them to see what their temperature is. If the temperatures are around between 165 and 175, I will remove the briskets. I wrap them very tightly in butcher paper. Then I put them right back on the smoker, and just close the lids and let Mother Nature and physics take care of the rest. When you try these different methods, or when you're cooking your briskets, I would recommend that if you want to change if you want to change something in your technique or in your recipe, just change one thing. Don't go off and change 3 or 4 things at a time, because then you won't know what one thing did or how they affected each other. So, for instance, if you're going to try wrapping as opposed to not wrapping, don't go ahead and do that while you're changing your temperature, right? So if you want to try cooking at a higher temperature, don't start wrapping at the same time, or not wrapping at the same time that you're changing your temperatures. The other thing I want to add, while I'm thinking of it, is take notes because this is truly trial and error. It's as much an art as it is a science. So as you are progressing through your stages of knowledge, take notes. What temperature? What time did you start it at? How long did it take to get to 165? How long did the stall last? Was it 75 degrees and sunny when you started cooking? Was it 60 degrees and rainy when you started cooking? All of these things will help you down the road to help you to anticipate anything that could happen that could potentially jeopardize how your briskets come out.
Alright, so that was a pretty fantastic presentation. I hope you all got a little something out of that. Don't forget, we also provided all participants with a set of delicious spice rubs from our friends at Salem Spice. And before we let you go, Sebastian, if people are looking for you at home, where can they find you?
Sure. They can always visit my website. It's www.thedonscatering, one word, THEDONS, catering.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram at the Don's Barbecue.
So be sure to give a like and a follow. This concludes our cooking demonstration with Sebastian and the Don's Catering and Barbecue, and thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to take part in anything else that's happening for Alumni Weekend. We've got a Harpoon Brewery beer tasting a little bit later on today if you've signed up for that. Tomorrow we'll take care of our jazz brunch acknowledging our 2021 Alumni Award recipients. Hope you'll join us. Thanks for tuning in. For more information, be sure to visit www.salemstate.edu/alumni weekend. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.